Hello YouTube, this is Hunter Surge, fresh off of the Poisoned Nectar Monthly. So I piloted Blizzstrix to a 4-2 11th place finish at the Poisoned Nectar Monthly. Um, the deck performed pretty well. I only lost the mirror match. I fought Jack Kyomu and Trishula in the mirror in round 2 and 3 and lost both of those, 1-2, unfortunately. And my tiebreakers were too bad to get in. And so were Trishula's. Very, very unfortunate. But it is what it is. This is a deck that I'm never going to be taking to a premiere anyways. Because like the nature of it gives it a really awful mirror, very little capacity for your skill as a player to put you over the top of your opponent. And decks are going to be teched out the ass for this. Like maybe people will be a bit less teched for it, but there are a lot of potential techs you can bring in that really hurt this deck, and some of the better decks in the format are decks that are already pretty well equipped to handle what Blizzstrix is going to be throwing at you. Like take for example that Pantera list that made top 8. Pantera is pretty solid into Lunar already. And is also very solid into Blizzstrix because you just go like Hydrake into like a Snowlair or Narpoon or Cedar Soar, then you Hydrake, crash into something, bring up Pantera, swing over the Blizzstrix. They must now get another Blizzstrix on the field to clear Pantera by effect because they can't get over Pantera's body. It's just too large for them. Lunar, likewise, so if you have a combination of Nobby plus Temple of the Moon plus either Zeus or Full Moon, you can get over Blizzstrix boards. Like, there's going to be a lot of stuff like that is going to be prepared for Blizzstrix. Like, the stuff that can handle those decks but can't handle Blizzstrix is probably going to die to Blizzstrix in Swiss. But that makes me, as a player, not really want to play Blizzstrix because it has an awful mirror and doesn't really give me that opportunity for my skill to be what's putting me over the top. Makes things way too dependent on matchup and luck of the draw. Not the place I want to be with a deck choice in a tournament with big pricing. That has always been my personal take on Blizzstrix, but I will be rampaging around locals and tournaments like the PNM with it, no problem. Based on what I just talked about, it should be pretty obvious that I'm not a big believer in the no counter rune version that Ren apparently is testing around, and that MBT showed off in his 20 minutes testing this week. I think this deck absolutely needs counter runes and needs a decent amount of them because you need to be able to protect your boards because there are setups that will tear you apart. Pantera, Nobby setups can do it. Joblin, if your Blizzstrix is not enchanted with the water and your opponent drops a Joblin, the Joblin switches Blizzstrix to defense, swings over the Blizzstrix, and then all of your 2 costs can't get over an 8 attack. Stuff like that. Water Reanimator in general has a really strong matchup into Blizzstrix. But let's get into it. So of course, we have the big man himself, 3 copies of Blizzstrix. He's a big old 12-6. Defensively, he's a lot weaker. This makes him very vulnerable to a Tsunami. Tsunami is really powerful into Blizzstrix in general as like a 1-cost answer to change your 7-8 attack damage board into only dealing 1 damage and putting your stuff in defense position where it's easier for your opponent to clear. General, very, very strong against the deck. Yeah, and as a chainable back row, you can use it before your opponent gets rid of whatever with the effect of Blizzstrix. Very important part of Blizzstrix is that its effect to return 3 Elestrals to your underworld to pop something is non-targeting, which results in 2 things. Result number 1 is that things that care about targeting, things that counter targeting, stuff like Morfrost, Terraform, Chronodial, and Voltempest. Voltempest is particularly relevant since we saw that have a showing in the top 8 at this PNM. You can pop all of those things and not have to worry about that stuff. The other part is that if your opponent wants to, it has like one back row or has a back row they particularly want to use, they have to fire it in response before you have decided a target. So if your opponent has, say, a tsunami or an altar that they want to use, they have to fire that in response, and then you get to pop something else, which is very, very powerful. It's like, I think it is probably the most busted part of the deck that this effect is non-targeting. The returning 3 is a significant cost. You will typically only get a certain amount of uses of this, and like at a certain point of the game, you're just going to run out of spirits and be unable to fuel your underworld anymore. For the deck to run properly and have the tools it needs, you can't go as heavy on Elestrals as you might otherwise want. So you can't make this super reliable, and you will be milling a bunch of runes in most of your games. 3 copies of Astral. I was very fortunate to get 3 copies of the Tournament Pack Stellar of Astral in time for this event. We actually pulled the 3rd one on our Thursday locals right this week. Very fortunate, very lucky. Oh yeah, on Blizzstrix. Do note you're not going to ascend into it with the special ascension effect a lot of the time. A lot of the time, what you're going to do is you're going to rise from the ashes at, or you're going to have one in hand and get a setup that has multiple 2 costs, and then be able to go, okay, I will just normal ascend now. Or you can just like, or you can hold, like, have a rise, know you have a Warlith in your underworld, and then on your next turn go, okay, rise from the ashes, bring back Warlith, normal ascend into the Blizzstrix. Very good stuff. Very, very good stuff. Astral, on the other hand, you are probably going to you're going to trigger its special ascension effect a decent amount of the time, because like the thing with Blizzstrix is that you have to get into the Astral and then you have to mill Blizzstrix after that. Even if you mill both on the same mill effect, you can't go Astral and then Blizzstrix right on top. It has to be on separate mills, because the Astral is not actually on the field for Blizzstrix to effectively target, for its effect to be a legal activation. Astral, on the other hand, you are very likely to special ascend into a decent amount of the time, because you go Snow It, you do your avalanches, you rise from any more. That's like, it's very likely you're going to special ascend into Astral. Is fairly likely, like, because a lot of the setups involve like milling 8 in a turn, sometimes more if you do really, really well. And Frost Sticks will give you multiple opportunities to bring back Snowlets and go for it again. Like on your next turn, after your Snowlet gets cleared, you might go in Frost Sticks, bring back Snowlet, and then re-enchanted Snowlet to mill 3 again. So that's going to happen a decent amount. It also has this Expend Frost to mill 4. Very often you won't actually get anything off this, but it is good to fuel your underworld so that you can get the things that you want to be able to target in your underworld in there, or have enough Elestrals in your underworld for Blizzstrix to have more activations of its very powerful removal effect. Then we have 3 copies of Morleth. We've talked about this card a lot. Very, very good card. As long as you have more Elestrals in your underworld than your opponent, you can just normal cast this from your hand, and then you mill 5. Just a 6/4, very, very strong, very good card. If you don't have Blizzstrix in your underworld, Morleth is often going to be your target for Rise from the Ashes, because like if you have like an Ashbrow or Snowlet on the field, you can bring back the Morleth and go for that special send attempt again. And it's just a really, really good body. Very, very good card. 3 copies of Cedar Soar. We love Wolf. We love Wolf. Yeah, so Cedar Soar is a 4/6 that when it is sent from our deck to the underworld, we get to cast it out with double Earth or double Frost. We only have 1 Earth in our Spirit deck here, so it's always going to be double Frost. That's what you want to be doing anyways. Cedar Soar is really important because it helps you get your setups where like you opened with a Blizzstrix and you go like Morleth, mill Cedar Soar. You now have 2 costs on the board, or Ashbrow, mill Cedar Soar, etc., etc. You basically, if you have Blizzstrix in your hand, you want to get to these spots where you have multiple 2 costs on the board, because your opponent will likely only be able to clear 1 of them, and then on the next turn, you're going to be able to ascend over. I have had a decent amount of times, scenarios where I've gone like Imfrostix for Snowlet, mill Cedar Soar. I have not used my normal cast that turn, and I just get to go immediately into Blizzstrix. If you have the opportunity, you always want to be turning the Cedar Soar into the Blizzstrix, because its own stat line is pretty mediocre. It is 2 damage on the board, so it's still like a good presence on the board when you're able to threaten your opponent's other stuff, and when you have counter runes to back it up. Very, very powerful card. It's a bit tricky though. I definitely did have at least one hand where I had triple Cedar Soar in the hand. I was like, well, this hand is getting mulliganed with the quickness. Yeah. All right, on to our 1 costs. Snowlet. We always want to open with a way to Snowlet, because this is how we get everything started. It's a 4/2. Pretty nice stat line. Crashes or gets over a decent number of things, especially in the Lunar matchup. The fact that when your opponent opens Werepup, you can go Snowlet and beat over the Werepup, thus forcing out the Leica Void. Is very, very, very nice, despite effectively being a setup Elestral. Yeah. And yeah, just on receive, you mill 3. Opportunities to double proc that if it lives a turn because your counter runes, your Frostix, whatever. Double proc it, get more procs of it, get more opportunities to get hit Ashbrow, get the Elestrals you want your underworld for rising from the ashes, yada yada. Very, very important. Really want to always start with a way to this. And the other way we get to this card is 3 copies of Narpoon. 4/3. On cast, you get to add a 1 Spirit Frost Elestral from your deck to your hand. Early game, that's almost always going to be the Snowlet. Yeah. This card's, like, I always felt this way when I was playing Cryo Rhino before, but Narpoon's stat line is just kind of ridiculous for a Searcher. Like, it's a 4/3, so it's not even in Cryoblast range, and it just gets you a guy while having a decent attack stat. It's just always been so, so good. What a nice card. Yeah. If we do not have, if we already have Snowlet and we go for an Narpoon, what we'll be getting is Imfrostix. Imfrostix is effectively a rune, but it's not written as a rune. You discard from your hand and pay 2 Frosts to special cast any 1-cost Frost Celestial from your Underworld. We really only have 1 target for it. It's Snowlet. It's always going to be Snowlet. Pretty nice card. Tadflow is another decent target you could run. I'm actually considering switching up the list with Tadflow, because I think Tadflow could make some of your opens a bit more real. And there's also the funny playline of potentially going Imfrostix for Tadflow, Tadflow Ascend into Aspral or Morlith, and then we haven't used our normal cast yet, so we normal Ascend with Blizzstrix from our hand, and that could be nice. Pandison, this was a tech I landed on after a lot of testing. So Pandison is a 1/4 Earth that can disenchant an Earth from this Pandison in order to return an Invoke rune from your Underworld to your hand. The actual purpose of this card is just to be more copies of Rise from the Ashes. Because typically what I am looking for in my opening hands is I want either Narpoon or Snowlet. I want a way to get to Snowlet. And in addition to that, I want a way to Rise. So I want either Rise itself or Pandison, because we're going to mill Rise at some point, and when that happens, that means we can play down Pandison and bring out the Rise from the Ashes, go into the Blizzstrix from our Underworld, and off to the races we go. This did come up a decent amount of the time. A lot of the time you aren't going to need it, but it's one of those things that's it percentage increases how often you're going to have a good keepable hand that does what you really want to be doing with this deck. So I found this very, very valuable for that purpose. 3 copies of Ambrosia. It's Ambrosia. Even with how fast this deck goes, any copies of Ambrosia you have is going to make it easier for you to keep yourself going if your opponent answers your boards. Often me having an Ambrosia in the hand is what allowed me to do an additional Rise from play, and it's very, very important to have access to. Speaking of, Rise from the Ashes. This deck would not function without this card. If you were just relying on randomly milling the Blizzstrix, while you have Aspral on the board or normal ascending it, it would be a lot weaker. Rise from because like that would basically mean if Blizzstrix gets answered, you don't really have a way back to it. Rise is your way back to it. It's very expensive, but it's what allows you to get these big, wide boards really fast and just overwhelm your opponent. Very, very, very powerful. Essential card. Our last Invoke rune is Avalanche. This is 1 Frost to make both players mill 3, and then if you have a Frost enchanted Elestral, you mill an additional 2. This is definitely like one of the weakest parts of the engine. I actually sided it out in a decent amount of matchups. I didn't side it out in my round 2 and 3 against the mirror, but when I fought the mirror again in round 6, I was like, no, I should be siding this out. I should, because like, oftentimes I find that you don't need Avalanche to get things going. And when I'm against a deck that the mill 3 for them is going to help them, it's not really ideal. And a lot of the time you really don't need it to get it going. But like, it is what that enables you to do stuff like cast Snowlet, mill 3, don't get anything. Okay, Avalanche, probably hit something. If you're milling 8, you have a pretty good odds of hitting something there. But I'm not the biggest fan of this card. This card is like, it feels decently cuttable. I might experiment with running something else in its place. I don't know. It's alright. It's not the most important thing in the world though. 3 copies of Gorgon's Gaze. Here's our counter suite. For our counter runes, what we really care the most about is stuff that is going to stomp battles attempting to clear our Blizzstrixes or other things on board. So all of our counter runes are going to be the ones that do that. So Gorgon's Gaze, of course, does that, but has a lot of other functions too. Really good at stopping a lot of different things that could clear our Blizzstrix. Good into the mirror to stop their own Blizzstrixes. Just all kinds of things this is really, really important for. Then we have Shield of Achilles. When your opponent attacks in, you get to bounce their thing back to hand and negate the attack. Obviously protects your guys. This feels like the weakest of the counter rune suite. If I was going to cut any of them, it would probably be copies of Shield. And then lastly, we have 3 copies of Tsunami. There's not a whole lot of water running around in the current format. Lunar will often like enchant a water onto their guys to get access to Tsunami immunity. Like if they go like say like a Void, typically the spirit they'll enchant from Spirit deck when they're doing their special ascension is going to be a water because they will already have the lunars they need on the like a Void from the full moon. Stuff like that. And like Tsunami, you'll probably see a lot of Tsunami in this format because Tsunami is very good. As I said earlier, it's very good against Blizzstrix. Doesn't matter how wide their board is. You flip Tsunami, they probably do not have like some of the Blizzstrix builds going around don't even have any water spirits. They have no capacity to misenchant with water. And even the ones that do have a very limited amount of water. Usually like 2 water spirits. So their ability to misenchant stuff with water is fairly limited. So this card is very powerful into the current format, and like it is the only other counter rune we can run that like is a guaranteed answer to combat in a lot of scenarios. Obviously, in certain scenarios, it's not going to be a guaranteed answer. Yada yada yada. But yeah, that is the deck list. That is the main deck. Let us get into the spirits and the sideboard. The sideboard's very clean. I'm very happy with my sideboard. Alright. So, spirits are very simple. We have 5, 10, 14 frost spirits. We need a lot of these. We have 2 waters for the Narpoon, for the Tsunami, and for misenchanting with water when we need to. We have 2 Licorice because we want to be able to resolve Blizzstrix twice in a game at least. Sometimes 3, but that's what Ambrosia is for. We have 1 copy of Teratlus for the Pandason. And then we have 1 copy of Owloon. This is here for a sideboard card. We have Dense Fog in the sideboard as like additional answers to to stuff like Lockagon or Lockagon and Morfrost. Morfrost. What's the one? Abominable Form, stuff like that. Mainly Lockagon. It's mainly so that we have more ways of stopping Lockagon's effect from going off and protecting our guys. Because Tsunami isn't very useful in that matchup, very obviously. And then sideboard. So, as promised, 3 copies of Dense Fog. Then we have 3 copies of Divine Blessing. Expect to see this card in a lot of sideboards this format. So Divine Blessing's big problem before is that the invokes that you are typically stopping would be removal. That would be the main thing you would be trying to stop. However, if you're in a board state where the spirit you would pay off is from a guy, well, Divine Blessing hasn't really done anything now, is it? And that play never felt super high impact. Even in Ascension decks would have an even harder time having another spirit laying around on the board for them to Divine Blessing to stop that removal. So it never felt terribly good. However, now we have 2 very powerful, very expensive Invoke runes running around in several decks in the format. We have Rise from the Ashes in Water Reanimator, Blizzstrix, and in Draco Ray Heal. And we have Hurricane in any deck that feels like it can run Hurricane. So Divine Blessing, if you're stopping a Rise from the Ashes or a Hurricane, even if you have to kill your only like 1 cost on the board, that's still very worthwhile. If you stop a Blizzstrix's a Blizzstrix player's Rise from the Ashes, that will win you the game. That is actually what one Trish hit the set in our round 3 match. Very, very powerful card in this format, specifically because the invokes that are commonly being used, there's just ones that are more well positioned. Divine Blessing is just better positioned against these invokes that are running around now than the ones that we had previously. Against removal, Divine Blessing never is not terribly good because it's a lot more conditional. But against stuff like Hurricane and Rise from the Ashes, stopping those even at the cost of your own guy feels super worth it a lot of the time. So very good card. Spoiled Fruit, this is a new thing that we got access to. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep this in. It's only really useful against Water Reanimator, and we have other tools for dealing with Water Reanimator. But for a lot of mid-rangey decks, this card feels very, very powerful. When your opponent uses something that would return spirits from their underworld to the spirit deck, you can flip this up, negate that effect, and destroy it. Very, very powerful to like seal up a game. Pretty powerful against Water Reanimator in general because like all the healing they need to run, and like it stops a proc of Lock On while also getting rid of a guy. If they go for Rise from the Ashes for Sluggle because they don't want to lose that many spirits, so that they can ascend into something from their hand. Spoiled Fruit just shuts down the entire play. Very, very powerful card. You're probably going to see this in a lot of sideboards throughout the format. 3 Mountains of Boreas. Stadium Wars are back. Particularly because of decks like Water Reanimator, which is a pretty good matchup into Blizzstrix, by nature of Lockagon, and Joblin as well. Joblin is also very good into the deck. And also, Lunar gets a lot of value out of its stadium. Temple of the Moon is what turns Full Moon into a full combat trick that gives you +2 and +2 and completely swaps combat in your direction. It's also what allows Lunar to get Doppelganger over Blizzstrix's, which is very, very potent as well. So just very, very good card to have in your sideboard for those matchups because you want to be able to play Stadium Wars. But also, Mountains of Boreas can be very effective for you too, because it makes it a lot easier, a lot harder for your guys to be cleared. Like, it turns Cedar Sword into a real body. Like that's one of the biggest things I felt whenever I play Mountains of Boreas in this deck is that it turns your Cedar Sword into a 6/8, and now it's a real threat. And like it improves the bodies on everything else a lot too. Snowlit in particular becoming a 5/3 and thus being able to beat over like eddies and stuff like that has felt really, really impactful. So this has been a really nice sideboard tool. Even though I didn't bring it up in a lot during Swiss, I brought it in once when I fought Spicy Sausage on Water Reanimator. But it did very much come up in that match. So and then we have 3 PTA. This is the thing I'm most likely to cut. I could see myself cutting this for Catarant. So like if I know I'm going into a time scenario, I can bring in some healing. The reason I'm not running Catarant in the main is that like in my testing, I felt that Catarant wasn't super impactful. So I just ended up cutting it completely. There are scenarios where Catarant is good, but like for Catarant to come up a decent amount, to be around for you to take advantage of in those scenarios, which is typically like in Frostix back Catarant, you heal back what you spent on Frostix, and then you ascend into a guy from your hand. For that to really happen, you need to be running like 2 or 3 of it so that you can actually get into your underworld pretty consistently. Just running 1 is typically not going to do the job, not worth it. But as a sideboard tool that we bring in for certain scenarios, for certain matchups, that feels a lot more worthwhile. Particularly like if you're going into a time scenario and you're like, I need to make sure I have some healing in here. So this is probably coming out for Catarant, but like this is the idea here is that like, oh, there's another counter rune that we can bring in for like when we're fighting water. And Tsunami isn't going to be very useful. Okay, I guess we bring in the Poison Tipped Arrow. This would be for like non-water reanimator builds of water predominantly. Because if you're fighting water reanimator, Divine Blessing is so strong into that matchup. Being able to stop their revival of Lock-On is huge. Because you build such wide boards, it's really easy to have the ability to pay Divine Blessing off of one of the guys you don't really care about. Like potentially, like you have a Cedar Sword lying around on the board, flip Divine Blessing, pay its initial cost off of Cedar Sword, and then disenchant the other spirit off of Cedar Sword to fully activate it. Stuff like that is very good for that. That's the list. Pretty happy with this list. Switching out the PTAs potentially for Catarants and trying to fit Tadflos into the main are really the only things I would change about this list. It felt very, very good. I just ran into the mirror, man. Just ran into the mirror. All right. With that said, I hope you guys enjoyed the deck profile. Later this week, we will be putting up the Lunar deck that we've been testing a lot and went to second place in this PNM. So look forward to that. And this is Hunter Surge signing off.